to war again. And this is probably the developing conflict with the least amount of eyeballs on it. Because this has never gone away. This conflict between China and India really, truly has never gone away. The China-Pakistan conflict has never gone away. But the India-Pakistan conflict has never gone away. But the Indians and Pakistanis, there's a weird, almost banality to that conflict in Kashmir, where the Indians clock in and the Pakistanis clock in. And they're literally at some of the garrisons, some of the defensive positions in Kashmir are at 16,000 feet, 16 and 17,000 feet. The Pakistanis rotate guys, and they send oxygen and oxygen tents and the whole thing. The Indians are under a lot of criticism because they send guys up there for months. And it's like going to the space station and losing brain cells. If you go up to 16 or 18,000 feet for months, you lose brain cells. You just flat out do. And so that's an issue that the Indians have been dealing with. So now they're dealing with another issue on their northwest border with China, where they're having to garrison an area well above 10,000 feet. So are the Chinese. And so the conflict from 1961 is an interesting one. How did it go? 1962. Keep in mind, in 1962, neither China nor India were nuclear powers. In 2017, they are both nuclear powers. And then, oh, by the way, Pakistan is a pretty tight ally with China. So we'll talk about the China versus India land war and what that might look like. Also, did Pakistan blink after Trump called them, an unreliable, lying, scumbag, backstabbing ally? Well, we'll talk about that as well. This is the Dark Secret Place. Bryan sits in here until midnight. KFI, AM 640, more stimulating talk. KFI, AM 640, more stimulating talk. It is the Dark Secret Place. Bryan sits in here live until midnight, and then Coast to Coast Weekend Edition happens, and then Elizabeth Espinoza tomorrow morning at 5 a.m., and Jesus Christ Show, etc., and then Super Hyper Local Sunday at 8 p.m. as the news cycle grinds to a halt in Los Angeles when we tell it to. So, yeah, the China-India thing, the immediate cause of the war back in 1961 was a territorial dispute between India and China along two sections of the border. The demarcations between China and Tibet after the post-colonial era had left the disposition of certain sectors unclear. Keep in mind, we're talking about, territorially, drops in the bucket. Or, just tiny changes in a border. But in some cases, that change in the border meant from the border going from the top of a ridge where you would want it down into a valley to where one side or the other got the advantage of having the entire ridge looking down into the valley. India deployed forces forward into a territory claimed by China and largely ignored both Chinese warnings about the deployment and the massive Chinese troop buildup along the border. The causes of India's poor preparation were a combination of political indifference and poor intelligence collection. And some say that's going on right now because the Chinese, probably the Indians, have been ordering their army into territory that the Chinese have claimed for years. And the Chinese are not real happy about that. You understand how sensitive the Chinese are about these islands that they made up in the South China Sea, right? So never mind made-up islands. This is land that has been there for billions of years. And the Chinese don't cotton to the Indians just showing up with cement mixers and bulldozers and claiming that it's theirs. It was an ugly war back in 1961. The two forces, the People's Liberation Army, specifically, had not learned a lot of lessons from the Korean War, and their light infantry tactics effectively amounted to human wave attacks up hills or down hills at the Indian Army. The Indian Army, while on the British model, could rely on firepower and maneuver, but they did not because they couldn't get the firepower up to the altitude where that war was. So the artillery and et cetera spent the war at lower altitudes firing what are called high-angle, high-altitude missions. So they never had the superiority of firepower that is necessary as the U.S. Army employed against Chinese human waves in Korea. So anyway, fast forward to 2017, and the tension between India and China is reaching the severe level because, and how do we know that? How do we measure this? Well, one of the ways that we measure this is it making it on Chinese TV? Well, it is because of social media more than anything, because the soldiers deployed by the Chinese and the Indians are updating their social media pages. Then this footage is easily accessible, and it's pissing off the Chinese to see a border nation, a neighboring nation, who are sending soldiers clearly into Chinese territory and then causing fisticuffs. And that's what it is. Because, again, these border guys, the Chinese and the Indians, some of them are armed, but they're never, ever using their firearms. But they are throwing rocks and punches at each other. And both sides, India and China, don't want to back down. They are both extremely stubborn, proud, headstrong countries. And the Chinese don't want to back down to the Indians, and the Indians don't want a repeat of 1961. And so one of these days, someone brings a rifle, maybe there's some shooting. I'll get the video when we come back. I'll play it to you. It's you know what it sounds like? It sounds like a bunch of Indian guys and a bunch of Chinese guys throwing rocks at each other. But it's better video to see, so I'll tweet out the video. Also, when we come back, a Chinese national was arrested in Los Angeles earlier this week on charges that he used the identical kind of computer malware that was used to hack the OPM, the Office of Personnel Management, which is where all of the classified background checks, the so-called, or the actually called SF-86 personnel security questionnaires were held. The Chinese have all that data. If you ever filled out a SF-86 from the 60s on, the Chinese have that data. Now, if you filled it out in paper, don't worry, it was scanned. Years later, after you got out of the Air Force, whatever service you were in, or private contractor, whatever, don't worry, it was scanned. It was still made in digits. So if you're thinking, oh, I dodged a bullet there, mine was on hard paper. No, it was scanned. But a Chinese national was arrested here in Los Angeles. Remember what I always tell you about Chinese intelligence and L.A. and the FBI? Well, the FBI got it right, luckily, and I'll tell you about it right after this. It's the Dark Secret Place. Bryan Suits in here live until midnight on KFI AM 640. More stimulating talk. In the late great Golden State, it's getting hard to negotiate when you one slip from a grand fate in the late great Golden State. KFI AM 640. More stimulating talk. It is the Dark Secret Place. Bryan's just in here live until midnight. A little Dwight Yoakam there, the late great Golden State. And stop it. All right, yeah, so I'm talking about the heating border exchanges, the heated and heating up border exchanges between China and India. Here's a little bit of some audio. I'll tweet out the link to the video where the guy does a flying kung fu kick and just kicks this Indian soldier off a cliff down to like a rocky beach on a frozen lake. But this is from just last month, and there's 3 minutes of preliminary fight in this, and they're yelling back and forth. They're way up in the Himalayas where the Indian Chinese border is, and I mean they're way up in. It looks like the top of the Sierra Nevada. It's like at 12,000 feet or something like that, and there's a stone fence that someone built maybe 10,000 years ago or something. On one side are the Chinese soldiers, and they are armed. And on the other side are the Indian soldiers, and they're armed as well. And it's not clear what the dispute's about. The Indian soldiers are standing on their side of the fence, apparently. The Chinese are on their side. And then at this point, a Indian soldier stands up on the stone fence, and it all goes to hell. I don't know either, okay? I don't know exactly what is going on here. And I don't even know what they're disputing about. But out of the shot, a Indian soldier has grabbed a Chinese soldier by the ears. He's actually twisting him by the ears, and the Chinese soldier is just screaming really, really loud. Well, let's hear that again. Or did we? There. And then, by the way, quick side note, in a official publication of the People's Liberation Army was talking about what the U.S. Army was talking about 10 years ago, about the upcoming generation of kids are far more obese than any generation prior, and that the Army and Marine Corps had to put incoming recruits into a crash course of a month of physical fitness to have them lose weight just to be normal. The Chinese came out this week and they said the current generation of kids are fat and they masturbate too much. And so they can't be in the Army, which I don't know what it's like in the Chinese Army. I know that the second thing has never been a disqualifier for the U.S. Army. The obesity thing, of course, is a problem. But the Chinese are saying that the internet is killing the Chinese Army because the darn kids are just too darn fat. So anyway, speaking of the Chinese, so the OPM hack, remember like I was talking about, the Office of Personnel Management. A Chinese national was arrested in Los Angeles this week on charges he used a rare type of computer malware that was also deployed to access millions of sensitive U.S. records from the OPM. Court papers filed against Yu Pinggan do not mention the OPM, but they do suggest a connection between the two. The OPM hack is considered one of the worst ever computer breaches of U.S. government computer systems because the hackers were able to access a huge volume of information from security clearance forms filed by federal workers and contractors. Gizmodo, and I'll send out a link to the Gizmodo story from Thursday, but they actually included the court documents that details what the malware was and the whole thing. This is what Gizmodo says. A 36-year-old Chinese national was arrested in Los Angeles this week in connection with a computer hacking conspiracy involving malware linked to the 2014 U.S. OPM data breach. Yu Pinggan of Shanghai, China, was arrested on Wednesday while traveling at LAX, also identified by the hacker pseudonym Goldsun. Yu had been charged under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act and is further accused of conspiracy to commit offense or defraud the United States. According to the indictment filed in the U.S. District Court for Southern California, this included two unnamed individuals who have not yet been charged to acquire and use malware to facilitate cyber attacks against at least four unnamed U.S. companies. The FBI has identified Mr. Yu's co-conspirators as living in the People's Republic of China. At this stage, the names of the companies, the victims here in the U.S., are being suppressed in the documents, which is not out of the realm of, it's pretty common. The indictment is accompanied by an affidavit signed by an FBI agent assigned to a cybercrime squad at the Bureau's San Diego field office. A spokesperson for the Bureau could not be immediately reached for comment. The FBI has been on the trail of these dudes for a couple of years, and they travel back and forth as private citizens, supposedly working for Chinese computer security companies, which, by the way, and I'm not being Mr. Yellow Peril here, but all Chinese computer security companies in China work for the Chinese government, okay, and not the Department of Agriculture. They work for Chinese Ministry for State Security. They work for Chinese intelligence, full stop. And if you want to continue to use Kaspersky antivirus, you go ahead. You feel free to go the hell ahead and use a friend of the Kremlin's antivirus software on your computer. Who would be more foolish? Someone using a Chinese antiviral software or Kaspersky? I don't know. Well, anyway, the Mr. Yu, arrested at LAX on Wednesday, is said to have breached a third company based in L.A. The attackers allegedly took advantage back in 2012 of a then unknown vulnerability, or as it's called, 0-day, in Microsoft's Internet Explorer, which allowed for remote code execution and injection of the malware called Sakula. So the tool, the malware, is a known tool of a China-based, what's called a advanced persistent threat nickname. Advanced persistent threat called Deep Panda. I have my stupid new phone on vibrating. It keeps doing that thing. Moreover, the connection that Mr. Yu has to the Chinese government will be revealed probably fairly soon, because the Chinese fear more than anything to have someone in American custody who sings, who spills his guts. And so this is a foreign national in the hands of the FBI being held here in L.A. He was part of the team that hacked the OPM, that gained access to every personal security questionnaire of everybody who ever filled one out from the 60s on. And now he's behind bars in the U.S. So how do we manage this guy? Do we plea him out? What's he going to tell us? Did he leave family back in China? Well, like I've told you, if you've never heard me before, then let me just get you here at the baseline and let you mull on this. This guy and his buddies come back and forth to conventions and shows and product reveals and things like that here in Southern California all the time. They have friends here. They have relatives here. The Chinese have more agents, more Ministry for State Security agents in Southern California than the FBI. But it appears that the FBI did something correct here. But the Chinese are absolutely in a full court press. The companies that are not named in the indictments, I'm going to take a wild stab. I'm going to say that they rhyme with Lockheed and Drummond and perhaps Borthrop. I'm not sure. I don't know. But the primary targets for Chinese spying in SoCal are high tech and aerospace. And yes, that does include SpaceX, by the way. Even though you're private sector, guess what? You're penetrated. You have no secrets. I don't know if you have or you want them, but if you thought you had them, you don't anymore. All right, we'll be back right after this. A final word, a special 3-hour Dark Secret Place wrapping up in just a minute. KFI AM 640, more stimulating talk. KFI AM 640, more stimulating talk. It is the Dark Secret Place one last time. Here, a special extended 3-hour Dark Secret Place because the Chargers preseason game. We wrapped up our coverage here on KFI with Chris and Carlo in the post game here right at 9 o'clock. And next week is a Thursday night game. That's the final preseason game for the Chargers. And then from that point forward, except for one or two, I think it's one Monday night game, then there's a Sunday night game. But otherwise, the Chargers, of course, playing at 1 p.m. on the West Coast from StubHub, or 10 a.m. if they go east. So it will not affect Dark Secret Place or Super Hyperlocal Sunday. So as we proudly present you the Los Angeles Chargers. That was like the most confusing thing about the game today was listening on to Matt Money Smith on the radio or watching on TV, is that the referees were saying, timeout, Los Angeles. Okay, well, they're both Los Angeles. Huh? And but we won't have to worry about that because the Chargers aren't going to be playing the Rams in regular season. So the final thing, this is something that I meant to talk about, I guess, a couple weeks ago, but the Russians are doing a huge exercise on their western border, the western border with Belarus, Poland, and the Baltic countries, where they have borders with the Baltic countries. And these are not defensive exercises. And in fact, they made a point that the makeup, the units that were going to be involved in what's called Zapad 2017. Zapad is Russian for West. For West 2017, it is a most offensive exercise. Unlike the U.S. and South Koreans undergoing their exercises right now, where it's an annual defensive exercise of how to respond to a North Korean invasion. This exercise with the Russians is huge. It involves most of their regular army west of the Ural Mountains, and it is intended as invasion practice, basically. The 1st Guards Tank Army is the first unit involved. And by the way, an army, in military parlance, the United States, nobody in NATO has corps formations right now, or army formations. The Russians do. See, in World War II, you have brigades or regiments, 2 or 3 make up a division. A division has between, say, 15,000 and 20,000 troops in it. So 3 or more divisions come together in what's called a corps, or an army group, depending on how you're formed. Like Hatton took the 7th Army, and the 3rd Army, and Bradley took the 1st Army. And then the 1st Army, he had 4 or 5 divisions. So we're talking about several 100,000 troops in a huge formation, right? In peacetime, we don't organize like that. We don't practice like that. We don't do exercises at Fort Irwin like that. At Fort Irwin, basically a brigade is sent, a brigade of 8 to 10,000. The Russians are doing an exercise right now with the 1st Guards Tank Army, which is made up of about 4 divisions. So several thousand tanks are practicing offensive warfare. And if that was the entire exercise, that would be no problem. It'd be like, it's what you do, right? Well, the Russians are simultaneously flexing other muscles. They're railway troops. You move armies, even in 2017, you move armies on rails, period. Full stop. You go from Georgia to California on trains, and people shoot video, and they think there's some weird, like, FEMA thing happening or whatever. But you have to have troops that can do that. The Russians are having a nationwide exercise of moving offensive military outfits to the west, to the western NATO border. So the railway troops are exercising right now. Also what are called pipeline troops. The Russians, they pipe natural gas to Europe, and those are secured by troops. And so they're having their exercises now. Logistics troops, the Russian Army Reserve, the Rosa Reserva, medical forces for mass casualties, the Russian Ministry for Emergency Situations, what we would call FEMA, they're having an exercise right now. The Russian Air Force in the West is dispersed out to their roadside bases. All highways in Russia, and I saw this in the Balkans, in Yugoslavia, all highways in Russia have stretches that are that have 2 and 3 mile straight stretches that are widened to be used as what are called dispersal airfields. They do that in Sweden, too. We don't do that here in the U.S., but they do it in Sweden, they do it in Russia, and the Russians right now have dispersed their air force to these dispersal airfields. The Baltic and Arctic fleets are fully fueled and loaded. That's part of their exercise. The Russian naval infantry, as they call it, what we call Marines, the Russian Marines and paratroops are also having an exercise right now. And their ICBMs are alert and dispersed. The Russian Topol system is a mobile ICBM that they bomb around on roads to keep it out of the eyes of American satellites. So if you were to script what the precursor to an invasion of Estonia would look like, you couldn't do any better than what the Russians are actually doing right now. And so regardless of whether or not they really are going to do anything with it, doesn't matter. They're practicing for it. This is, in other words, this is a contingency that they're planning on. NATO is not practicing invading Russia. NATO is practicing fighting off a Russian invasion, and Russia's playing their part. They're practicing invading. So that's where we leave you. Russia practicing to invade Europe, and India and China throwing rocks at each other. And I tweeted out that video of the Chinese-Indian martial arts and rock fight from last week. And so you can go to Dark Secret Place and check that out. All right, I'll be back for Super Hyper Local Sunday tomorrow at 8 p.m. Thanks to Hector and Michael Chappé. And we will talk to you tomorrow on KFI AM 640, more stimulating talk. A rented house blowed up. 2 were dead inside. One was suspected to be an imam from the city of Ripoll nearby. So Catalan police have raided his house today, overnight, Friday night into Saturday, primarily seeking DNA to confirm that it is his carcass in the body. A spokesperson for the Catalan police told the British Telegraph newspaper they were working on the principal hypothesis that the cell was comprised of 12 members, 11 of whom have now been identified and hail almost exclusively from the Spanish city of Ripoll. 5 members died at the hands of police in the attack on Cambrils late on Thursday night, which killed 1 woman and injured several others. The names so far, Musa Ukabir, a 17-year-old, Mohammed Hachami, 23, and Saeed Ala, 19, all believed to be of Moroccan origin, have been officially identified as among the attackers killed. Mohammed Hayachami's brother, Hussein Ayukob, who is presumed to be a family member of the suspected driver, Russia practicing to invade Europe, and India and China throwing rocks at each other. And I tweeted out that video of the Chinese-Indian martial arts and rock fight from last week. And so you can go to Dark Secret Place and check that out. All right, I'll be back for Super Hyper Local Sunday tomorrow at 8 p.m. Thanks to Hector and Michael Chappé. And we will talk to you tomorrow on KFI AM 640, more stimulating talk.